What is the human experience if not sharing some kind of experience with other human beings? That's how you get over isolation. And I hate to sound like a boomer with this, just do things with other people. I'm talking about conceptually. Conceptually, how do you alleviate this nagging pain and misery that must appear with prolonged isolation? How is that resolved? It is, broadly speaking, doing stuff with other people, but you have to be comfortable around these people. You have to be able to trust them. And I'm framing this in negatives, aren't I? They can't be toxic to you. And sometimes that's a tall order. And that's something where what seems poisonous to me might not be poisonous to another person. Like there's certain ideologies. If there's an ideological resonance with someone that has a particular viewpoint, then they might get along well with group A, but they might conflict significantly with group B, where the opposite might be true for another person, where because of different ideological beliefs, different things that they personally identify with that they could not give up without destroying part of their identity. And here we could open another can of worms about sometimes it is important to destroy destructive parts of your identity so that you can become a better person. However, that's something that would require a lot of debate and rationalization to go about, okay, first off, what's the premise? What is the thing that we are addressing? What is the behavior that we are addressing? What is the belief that we are addressing? What is the basis for that belief? And what is the rebuttal against that belief? But again, this kind of rational discourse is not necessarily accessible by the larger population. That's not something that people have an interest in doing. That's something that has to be learned and is usually taught through culture. But we are not taught to be rational in the context of the modern culture, in my narrow-minded view of modern American culture as it is. It's odd because we put critical thinking on a pedestal, rightly so, but what is critical thinking often gets confused with critical theory, which is bunko crazy off-the-wall nutso-ness of just, well, I'm going to be contrarian because this is something that sounds rebellious but is actually widely accepted and approved. That gets into its own weirdness. You need to be able to have rational discourse in order to properly identify problems at hand and to be able to overcome them. But again, that's really hard to engage with. So you absolutely need people that you can trust in order to get over the misery of isolation. And it's a grueling process of figuring out, okay, what does this group of people believe? And what are their reasons for believing this? How does this help them to live better? How can this help me live better? Where do I fit in with all of this? It's an absolutely grueling process to go through that analysis. One reason why people are so absolutely miserably exhausted and have no sense of belonging whatsoever is because they are constantly engaged in this process of, it's not necessarily analyzing other people. It's like you have something to prove, but you're not accepted because you don't belong anywhere. Here's the companion that goes along with not belonging to a community. We absolutely struggle and suffer for not belonging to a community that is part of our identity. But when we are trying to find that sense of community, it's very painful to go through this process of analysis, trying to see where you fit in. That is absolutely stressful, absolutely anxiety-racking. And it is a constant process that does not reach resolution in many cases, with people like moving around a lot, or people coming and going with, we were friends in high school, but then we went to different colleges, or groups disbanding or reforming or things like that. Or just having friends that are solely online where you don't have that in-person connection, which again is important for here's another thing that I meant to reach. Just seeing other people, just being around other people and absorbing that body language, absorbing that, I don't want to sound too abstract about it, but absorbing that presence of other people that are there for you, that you are comfortable with, is very important for psychological health. And you don't get that through interacting on social media. I don't want to go into too much abstractions of like there may be a factor of mental health that is dependent upon being physically present with others. Well, actually, there's some odd scientific arguments dealing with olfactory feedback of all things, of subtle scents in the air that can affect chemical reactions and such. I believe there's a theory like that about why if a bunch of women are living together, like in college dorms, why do their periods synchronize? I know it's disgusting to talk about, but anatomy and the human body and things like that. We're talking about physiology here. So get over yourself when we're talking about medicine. Let's be serious adults here for a moment. One theory of, well, how does that happen? What's the mechanism by which women's periods synchronize might be because of subtle olfactory signals that are sent out and absorbed over an amount of time from just being in close proximity. But you're not constantly thinking about what the other person's armpits smell like. No, there's subtle things. There are subtle chemical communications that humans have from being physically present around one another that extend beyond the sight and sound that we can portray electronically. And there's a huge area of knowledge and discussion to be had about the importance of physical contact for neurological health for one thing, but for mental health more broadly as well. That's a topic for another time. You can't get to that point of comfortable physical contact, and also you can't get to that with the cultural barrier that stigmatizes physical contact, especially between men. There's the modern cultural barrier of any physical contact of a guy with another guy is gay. That's a toxic social construct that gets in the way of healthy masculine mental health, for one thing. That gets really difficult to talk about because, one time I was trying to discuss this idea of it's important to have comfortable physical contact. Okay. Before I get into that, the other thing that I wanted to get at is you can't get to the point of any sort of physical interaction if you are not physically present with the other person and if you're not comfortable with being physically present with the other person. Okay, that wraps that up. This last point that I wanted to get at to wrap this whole thing up is I was trying to explain this idea of to be comfortable with another person, to be naturally comfortable around people. You should be comfortable with putting your arm around a guy while you're telling a story to him. That's not gay. It sounds weird out of context when you're talking about, well, why are you putting your arm around or anything like that? Giving your friend a pat on the back, going bowling and the guy bowls a strike. Hey, you did a good job there. Not just a thumbs up or whatever. When you really want to celebrate something, when you really like cheering for something, you hug each other. You give a bear hug and you lift them up off the ground. Something like that. Physical contact is so difficult to talk about because there's so much social stigma around it and so many social presumptions around it as well. I was trying to talk about the importance of physical contact and how there is negative stigmatization between men having physical contact with one another and the other person. Their eyes glaze over. They got that 60% comprehension going on. I should mention that later. When people read over something, the average reader only comprehends about 60% of what they've read. It's like 200 words per minute and only 60% comprehension is the average, and we call this literacy. So that's an odd reference that I made there. But this other person, their eyes glaze over and they're not listening properly to what I'm saying about physical contact, comfortable physical contact being necessary for mental health, and how that's stigmatized between men. And they say, oh yeah, it's terrible how so many people are homophobic. And I go, I wasn't talking about homophobia. I was talking about how because people are afraid of being labeled as gay or being seen as less masculine for physical, it's just icky to be physical with another guy. And I don't mean that in the sexual context. I'm not talking about gay. Now with coronavirus and everything, you can't even shake hands with people. And I can address that issue with less hostility and baggage than talking about physical contact with someone of the opposite sex. Because then there's a whole dynamic of baggage that goes along there, of just having a female friend that you hug. That should be okay as well. But there's emotional baggage of There's just emotional baggage that goes along with that, and we're not going to get into that discussion. Long story short, about being able to physically interact with other people, it's necessary for mental health, for just maintaining mental health, to be at neutral, to be at zero, to be treading water. You need to have positive social interaction on a regular basis, and part of that interaction has to be in person and has to include a comfortable amount of physical movement. Which is why, like, overcoming isolation, you have to do something together with others, such as, like, I go jogging with this group of people.